Hi everyone. Just wait for a few of you to join us. Well, we've got 2 people already. A lot were keen on this class, so I think it'll be a popular one.
Oh yeah.
5, 7, 8.
Oh wow.
Got Paige, Gemma. Can one of you just comment to make sure you can see us here as the usual? Thanks, Paige. Brilliant. Right, we'll get started. So, hello everyone. Today we've got a breastfeeding class, which I'm sure will be popular. I know a lot of you want to start breastfeeding. It's with Bea King from Melton Breastfriends. She's going to just talk to you about the first week of breastfeeding, what to expect. She's going to answer the frequently asked questions. If you've got any questions of your own, pop them down, and at the end we'll do a 5-10 minute Q&A if she's not already obviously answered the question throughout the talk. It will last around 50 minutes or so, then we'll do the questions at the end, so please pop them as you go along, as you think of them. I'll make a note of them all as we go along and ask whatever's relevant at the end. But yeah, over to you, Bea. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jade, and thank you for having me on today. So as Jade mentioned, I'm Bea. I am an NHS trained peer supporter with Melton Breastfriends. I'm also trained as a mother supporter with the Association of Breastfeeding Mothers. I do also help admin a group online, quite a large breastfeeding support group online as well. I have a 2.5-year-old who's still breastfeeding. She is in the house, but she is asleep at the moment, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that she stays asleep for the duration of this time. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about why peer support is so important, especially at the moment. So World Health Organization are very much encouraging breastfeeding during coronavirus, and that's for a few reasons. So the first one is that there have been women that have been tested for coronavirus, and then they've had their milk tested as well, and they found out that the virus does not pass through the mother's breast milk. It can obviously be passed through touching, as we know, but it can't be passed through the breast milk. That's a good thing to know. And as we know, our bodies create antibodies for babies as well with breastfeeding. So obviously if mum ends up with some symptoms or signs or ends up having coronavirus, her body will start working, the breast milk will start being made and give antibodies to the baby to try and prevent them from getting the virus or to help speed up their recovery. So it's nice and quick as well. And also, I think there's been 2 babies now that have been admitted to hospital with coronavirus, but they've ended up recovering solely on breastfeeding, which is quite fascinating at the moment. So with that in mind, obviously, support groups have actually been suspended at the moment, face-to-face, which was a quite a sad moment for us as peer supporters, because we love doing that every week, bringing in mums to the groups, talking to them. So it was quite hard for us to have to stop those face-to-face groups. But we have had to do it in different ways. Online support, we've got Facebook groups, messages, video consultations as well. Groups like this are fantastic to get that support from not only other mums, but from other professionals that are in the group as well. So it's a really good way to get that support. But it's just a good way to know that you're not on your own during this just because the groups have been shut. There are people out there willing to help you online as well and through videos as well. And videos can actually be a really helpful way for us to see attachment and see what needs to be changed possibly. So the first few weeks tend to be the most challenging, and especially without any face-to-face groups being available, because it tends to be the time where most women end up doubting their bodies and second-guessing themselves, wondering what's happening, is this normal? And they end up stopping before they actually want to. So the recent statistics show that around 81% of women initiate breastfeeding, and by 6 weeks, that has gone down to around 24%, showing that around 60% of women just haven't been given that support to continue breastfeeding. So that's what sort of we want to do. We want to give you that support to continue if that's what you want to do. So with that in mind, I decided that today we're going to talk about the first week of breastfeeding, give you some information, know what to expect, how to cope with everything that goes on in that first week, because so much changes in that first week. I think it's probably the time where so many things happen and it can become quite overwhelming to a new mum especially. So it's just knowing how to cope with those things. So how I'm going to do this there's going to be 5 main points that are going to be helpful to sort of aid you in that first week of breastfeeding. They may not be directly related to breastfeeding, but they will be related in some way to help you on that journey. And then also some sort of frequently asked questions to really pinpoint those topics that people might be wondering about. So straight on with it, point number 1 is skin to skin. It's a fantastic way for all mums, really, not just breastfeeding mums, to get that connection between mum and baby, and dad and baby, really. It regulates baby's heart rate, it regulates their breathing, it helps baby to feel content and safe, because all they've done for the last 9 months is be inside you. They're outside, they don't know what's happening. So skin to skin really helps them sort of just calm down, relaxes them quite a lot. And when it comes to breastfeeding, when some babies are struggling to latch, they're not quite getting the grasp of things, we sometimes suggest mum and baby just get some skin to skin together, lie in bed, get all relaxed, and that normally helps baby to get that latch going because they're relaxed instead of feeling all a bit stressed. So one thing with skin to skin, in the very first hour after baby's born, we like to call the golden hour. We say that if you can get you and baby having some skin to skin for that first hour of their life. Obviously, if sometimes medically that can't always happen, but that does not mean that breastfeeding isn't going to go well, nothing like that. It can just really help things get going. So if you can, have some skin to skin right after baby's born, and babies tend to do what we call a bit of like an army crawl, and they latch onto the breast by themselves. And it's quite amazing to watch them do that, because they just don't need any help from us. They will instinctively just, if you leave them to it, they'll get themselves on. So it can be very nice to do. And it's not just something for a newborn or straight after birth. If you don't get skin to skin at birth, it's absolutely no problem at all. Skin to skin works for months and months. Maybe not for a 6 or 7 year old, but possibly it works for those first few months. Absolutely wonderful to have for mum and baby. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is responsive feeding. And this is a really important one for breastfeeding, especially, but it does also work for bottle feeding as well. I will talk about that a little bit. But responsive feeding means that we're responding to baby's cues instead of making our own schedules to suit us. And a lot of, usually the older generation, tend to have the idea that baby needs to feed every 4 hours and that's all that they will need. But realistically, babies will feed a lot more often than every 4 hours. Sometimes, it might be only 10 minutes after the last feed, especially when baby is cluster feeding. When the milk comes in, it tends to be quite often, very, very frequently at the start. So it's about being able to respond to their early cues, which I'll talk about later, and allowing them to feed for as long as they want as well, not limiting the time that they have on the breast and just letting them feed as and when they need, because that will help their weight gain, but it will also really aid your supply of your milk. And it will mean that your milk supply establishes much faster than if you try and stop that from happening. So it's really important to let them just feed as and when they need. But responsive feeding doesn't just mean when the baby wants feeding, it also means when mum wants to feed as well. So mum may be feeling a little bit lost, a little bit sad, sometimes lonely, and she might want to feel a bit of a connection. So she may want to just grab baby and pop them on the breast to just feel that connection, because oxytocin, which the hormone is released when you breastfeed, both baby and mum get that release of hormone, which just makes you feel really happy, really relaxed. It's like the love hormone. So it's really nice to be able to get that. So if mum's feeling a little bit down, she may want to just get that connection with baby. So she's able to feed whenever she wants to as well. It also may work in the fact that mum might want to be taking a bath, but she's worried that baby's going to wake up in the next 5 to 10 minutes because the last feed was 2 hours ago. So she may want to give baby a quick feed to sort of top them up a little bit, and then jump in the bath so she knows that baby is nice and full and she can have a nice relaxing bath. So it's about that as well. So when it comes to bottle feeding, responsive feeding is important as well, but it is slightly different because you can overfeed a bottle-fed baby, whereas you can't overfeed a breastfed baby. So it's still about responding to their cues, keeping, when they are hungry, feeding them instead of a schedule. But it's about how you feed them and sort of keep them a little bit more upright rather than laying down, and giving them breaks in between to sort of let their body figure out that they're full and if they're full or not. That's called pace feeding, which I'll pop a link in afterwards to sort of for other people to be able to see that. Now, in the early days of breastfeeding, responsive feeding is important, but it's slightly different because we may need to take charge a little bit instead of just letting baby wake and feed as and when they want to. Because in the early days, they do lose a little bit of weight. They tend to lose up to around 10% of their birth weight. And then they tend to put it on once your milk comes in on sort of day 4 or 5, and they start to put that back on again. But in that first week, if they're losing weight, they need to be woken up a little bit more, fed a little bit more. They just need a bit more encouragement from us to get that feeding going. So usually midwives tend to suggest not letting baby go more than 3 to 4 hours of breastfeeding during that first week, just so that we can keep those blood sugar levels up to a nice high level and keep them getting fed. Sometimes they can get a little bit sleepy, too sleepy to wake up and feed. So they just need a bit of a nudge sometimes in that first week. But after they've sort of regained their birth weight and they're gaining weight at a nice way, then you can just leave them for however long they want to go between feeds. So that's responsive feeding. Going on to the next one is positioning and attachment. This is quite a big thing for breastfeeding, and it kind of is the main point, because if you can get that right and get the right positioning and attachment, you'll be able to sail through it lovely. If it's slightly off positioning and attachment, there can be a lot of problems along the way. It could be baby not gaining weight sufficiently. It could be them not having sufficient nappy output. It might mean that your nipples end up being in pain, and it could be cracking, mastitis, thrush, all kinds of things. So we don't want that for mum, we don't want that for baby. So it's really key to get breastfeeding, positioning and attachment right as early as possible. And the main thing to mention in this one is that breastfeeding should absolutely not hurt. If it's hurting, something's not quite right and you need to seek support. Don't sit and suffer in silence trying to push through it because you've been told nipples need to toughen up and it gets better after the first few weeks, but it does hurt for the first few weeks. It shouldn't hurt at all. It might be a little bit uncomfortable, a bit of a pinch when they first sort of latch on, a bit uncomfortable, but if it goes after around 10 seconds, that's fine. If it keeps going throughout, that's when you know something may not quite be right in that. So positioning and attachment, a good way to remember how to get baby positioned and attached right is chins. So I've got my little baby here, and C is for close. We want baby nice and close to us. Sometimes baby needs to have their bottom tucked in a little bit so they can be nice and close to our body. Sometimes we put elbow there to just pull them in nice and close to you. They're nice and close, they'll be able to get a good latch there. Head free. So a lot of people tend to hold their head, and that is quite common because we're told from a very early time, protect their head. We need to protect their head. But when it comes to breastfeeding, they need that head free to be able to, they sort of fling it back just before latching on. And if we've got our hand there, they're not going to be able to fling it back enough to be able to get that wide latch. So we don't even want a finger behind them. So hands sort of either side of their neck, shoulders. Sometimes their head might flop a little bit that way. You just need a sort of finger to just pull their head up on the side of their area, but nothing actually on their head. We've got close, head in line. That doesn't mean in line with our body. That means in line with themselves. So we don't want their head sort of to one side. Because if you were to try and turn your head to the side, try and drink a glass of water, it's very difficult to actually swallow anything. So they're going to struggle to actually get any milk in there because it's quite difficult. So we want their body to be in line together. They've got close, head free, in line with themselves, nose to nipple. Really important one this is, because if you're trying to attach baby and going like mouth, nipple on, they're going to get a very shallow latch. They're going to be nipple feeding like this. And that's going to really hurt you, for one, and that's not going to be massaging this breast tissue around here, which is where all the ducts are to help get that milk out. We want them, their lips massaging this bit here to get that milk out. We don't want them on the nipple. So we want their nose to be in line with the nipple, and they'll tilt their head back, go on, and they'll get a really nice wide latch on there. That's what we want to look out for, so that they kind of looking up at the breast rather than straight on ahead. Up, and they'll be able to get that nice wide latch. So we've got close, head free, in line, nose to nipple, and the S is for sustainable. We don't want you in a position where you're going to be uncomfortable the whole time. If you're getting ready, everything's perfect, in baby's feeding, and now I've got to stay here for half an hour and I feel really, really uncomfortable. You need to find a position where you are comfortable and you're relaxed in. If you're going to be feeling uncomfortable for the whole feed, it's not going to be very nice for you. And we want you to be relaxed while feeding. Important thing is having, obviously, snacks, drink, phone charger and remote close by as well while you're feeding, so that you can have that all ready to go. But those things are important. We have close, head free, in line, nose to nipple, and sustainable. And there's a really, really good video actually on globalhealthmedia.org. I'll pop that on afterwards as well. It shows a lot about how to latch that baby on, and actually it shows what a bad attachment is as well, so you can see the difference in it. So you can kind of pinpoint, oh, that's what's happening at the moment. I need to change it to this one. How do I do that? And it shows how you can do that. And we also talk about angle of the dangle rather than tummy to mummy. A lot of people talk about tummy to mummy, but if you have larger breasts and you have a nipple that's sort of pointing downwards, you're going to have to be pulling that breast up to latch them on. And again, that's not sustainable for you to be able to hold that breast the entire time to keep that baby latched on. And it also can stop some of those ducts from enabling the milk to come out. So sort of if your nipples are facing more downwards, we want baby to come up from the bottom, so that they're latching on like that instead of pulling your breast up. So that's a little bit about positioning and attachment. Could go on about it for a very long time because it is quite an important topic, but that's a little sort of snippet about it. The number 4 is safe bed sharing. Now, this is something that probably quite a few people might cringe at the thought of, quite common for mums actually. But the statistics show that around 2/3 of women end up bed sharing at some point during the child's life. So it's really important to know sort of how to do it safely, rather than just saying, don't do it, and then mums having no idea how to actually do it safely, so that we want to decrease those risks of anything happening. So we like to talk about the Safe Sleep 7. So 1, a non-smoker, 2, sober and unimpaired. So we can't have any alcohol, and you mustn't sort of be having any medication that might make you drowsy before bed. If you do take medication before bed that makes you drowsy, it might be wise to just contact your GP, see if there's maybe either another medication you can take, or if you can take it at another point in the day rather than just before bed. A fully breastfed baby, as we know that breastfeeding reduces the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. So you want to have a fully breastfed baby on their back. As we know, the Back to Sleep campaign, on their back is the safest place for them to be. Lightly dressed, so we don't want them in loads and loads of covers because they'll be close to you, so they'll get your body heat as well. So we want them sort of, if it's a coolish day, coolish night, maybe just a baby grow. If it's a warm day, maybe just a vest. But we want them lightly dressed and on a safe surface. So that is quite a hard mattress rather than a sort of like a memory foam mattress, and not a sofa, as we know that that's not the safe place for you to be sleeping with your baby. In a bed, is the safest place if you're going to be bed sharing, not on a sofa. And other helpful pointers for that is that baby is at your breast height. So they end up feeding, sort of rolling away, and that's the height that they stay at. And your arm is above their head and between the pillow and their head. So it will stop that pillow from coming anywhere near them. That will stop that there. So no covers for baby. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a duvet. Just try and keep it no higher than maybe your waist. And what I used to do is tuck my duvet between my legs, and that kept that duvet there and meant that it wouldn't go onto her at all. And you make a C shape around your baby, like a protection around there. And that actually stops you from being able to roll as well, because your knees are actually in the way of you being able to roll. And baby is not between mum and dad, just on mum's side. Obviously, no alcohol, no drugs, medication, smoking. And we need a full-term baby. So that means anything before 37 weeks, you need to consult with a healthcare professional for that, because it is slightly different for premature babies. If they're above 37 weeks, then it's absolutely safe. And the reason I'm talking about safe bed sharing is because breastfeeding can be quite exhausting, and it does make you very tired. Sometimes you're struggling to put baby back down, and you're just at the point where I can't do this anymore. I'm so tired. And getting them to have some sleep and getting you some sleep is a really good way of being able to continue. And some people, it can be the sort of lifeline that keeps you going with breastfeeding. And as they get older, they actually end up latching on by themselves and you not being woken up at all. It started sort of around 4 to 5 months. My daughter started just crawling over, latching on, and we'd wake up in the morning and I'd go, I don't know how many times she fed last night, because I didn't even wake up. And it's the most sleep I've ever had, to be honest. So that's why I've sort of spoken about safe bed sharing there. And I just believe that it's an important thing for mums to know how to do it safely, rather than to just do a blanket, no, don't do it. The number 5 is normal baby behaviour. So babies behave in a way that a lot of people tend to think means something's wrong. But they go through those first 12 weeks after they're born, we call the 4th trimester, because they've not quite realised that they're actually detached from you. They don't know what's happened. They don't know what world they're in. They need to still be quite close to you. They want to be close to you. They're waking often. They tend to want to sleep on us because they want to hear our heartbeat, because inside the womb, that's all that they've been hearing for the last 9 months. So they want to be close to you and be able to hear that heartbeat. So a lot of the time people think that means something's wrong. They're not being put down. It's very, very normal. Babies need to be close. That is just their innate need to be able to survive. They need to be close to you. Things that can help that are any ways to replicate the womb. Some people like to use white noise. They have apps, they have little sort of toys, I think, that play white noise music. And that replicates the womb. Being nice, close and snug to you, but pods and sort of sleepy heads, they aren't considered safe by Lullaby Trust. So sort of making it nice and close for them without putting them in a space that's not quite safe for them, which can be difficult, obviously, when it comes to putting them in an empty cot or something, because there isn't anything to keep them nice and snug. So that is why a lot of the time they want to just be close to you. That's their safe place. And that's why sometimes breastfed babies feed very frequently as well, because it's not just a meal, it's their way of feeling safe. That's their safe place for them, your breast. That's where they know they're absolutely fine. They know they're safe. Responsive feeding helps. Keeping to their feeding cues can really help them to relax and keep calm. A baby sling is really helpful for if you do need to get up and do stuff, which obviously a lot of us do need to actually do other stuff than looking after the baby. A sling's really helpful to be able to get us out, do jobs around the house, go for a walk, having baby nice and close. They feel nice and relaxed when they're close to you. Have a baby moon. So that means sort of snuggling in bed, having some skin to skin, and just lying there for a while and just letting the world go by, not thinking about anything else. I like to say expectations low. So setting them quite low instead of thinking, right, today I'm going to be doing this wonderful meal, I'm going to cook, I'm going to clean, I'm going to do the laundry, I'm going to do this and that. Because if you can't get that done and baby needs to be close to you that whole day, you're going to feel quite rubbish about yourself. I tend to find that I found myself feeling really rubbish if I couldn't get that done. So I ended up setting my expectations a lot lower. I'm going to cuddle my baby and feed them today. I might get a bit of washing up done. And then if I got a bit more done, I'd feel so much better than be feeling a bit low. So set your expectations low of what you might be able to do during those early weeks, because they will need to be nice and close. If you have someone that can help you, call them in. If you have a partner at home, if you live with your parents, if someone can help you around the house, get them to do other stuff, cook, clean, while you can just cuddle your baby. So just a quick recap on those 5 points. There's skin to skin, responsive feeding, positioning and attachment, safe bed sharing, and normal baby behaviour. Those are those 5 pointers. I'm going to now move on to the frequently asked questions, which hopefully will really pinpoint some things that people might be feeling a bit not concerned about, but be thinking about in the back of their mind about breastfeeding. So the first one here is, how do I know when my baby has finished feeding? So to know when they're finished feeding, they will naturally fall off the breast by themselves instead of taking them off. They'll do what we call sort of little flutter sucking. They'll do sort of these little flutterings, which is when they get the fattiest milk that there is in your breast. That's when they get the really fatty milk. That's when a lot of people think, oh, they're done feeding, I'll take them off. Keep them on for that and let them fall off the breast by themselves. And when they come off, they'll be content, they'll be a bit milk drunk, which is a great thing to watch, and they'll be happy. And that's when you know that they're finished feeding. You can offer the second breast. We sometimes say to offer the second breast, but some babies will need it, some babies won't. They don't accept it, they don't need it. If they accept it, they might need a little bit more, but all babies can be different depending on that. The next question is, how long should I feed my baby for? There's no set time really that babies need to be spending on the breast. It can vary so much from baby to baby and from woman to woman as well. It can sort of vary between around 5 minutes to 45 minutes. And some babies will literally only need a quick 5-minute feed each time. That's it. Some babies will need a bit longer to get that full feed, but it does depend on each baby. It's not a case of, some people say they need 20 minutes on one, 20 minutes on the other. That's not how it works. They will literally just feed for as long as they need, and then they'll come off naturally, as mentioned in the last question. So it just varies. So don't worry if your baby is only feeding for 5 minutes, and don't worry if they're feeding for more than 45 minutes to an hour. Totally normal. That's what your baby needs. Next one is, how can I tell that my baby is drinking? That's quite a good one to know, because some people sort of, they're on the breast, how do I know they're actually getting anything at this point in time? You'll see big puffed out cheeks like a hamster. You want them to be really rounded. You don't want them to be sucking in like a fish. That shows they're not actually getting anything. You want them nice and puffy. And you'll be able to see swallows as well. That will vary depending on the point in time that the feed is at. So at the start, they'll be doing really, really quick suckles to get that let down. They'll do the really quick ones. And then when they've got that let down, they'll change to more slow suckles, and they'll do a swallow sort of every 2 to 3 sucks. They'll do a few sucks and then they'll do a big swallow. And then towards the end, when they do the flutter sucking, they'll be doing that lots, and then they'll have a swallow sort of every 2 minutes or so, rather than often. So whatever point of the feed that they're at, you'll be able to see swallows. If they're not swallowing, they're not getting anything at that point in time. And they'll obviously be calm and relaxed after that feed as well, rather than still be quite angry, hungry. Sometimes they can be fussy after a feed, and that's really normal. If it happens for a long period of time, for a case over about a week or so, it can maybe mean that something is a bit off, and it's good to seek some support and some help in that. So next question is, how do I know how much my baby is getting? And I think this is quite a big one for breastfeeding, because obviously with a bottle, you can see the amount they're getting, you know exactly what they're getting. Breastfeeding is obviously different. You can't physically see the amount unless you're expressing that amount. The key ways of knowing what they're getting is by nappy output and weight gain. Now, obviously, at the moment, weight gain isn't quite as what it was, because we're not getting that face-to-face support. We're not getting as many weigh-ins and health visitor. We're kind of getting the very minimal that new mums and new babies should be getting. So it's not quite what we're after. But nappy output is a great way to know exactly what they're getting. So on day 1, we want to see about 1 to 2 wet nappies for baby. And that increases each day. Sort of day 2, you want 2 wet nappies, 3 wet nappies. Day 4, 4 to 5 wet nappies. And on day 6, you want at least 6 wet nappies per day. And you want them to be sort of a good wet nappy. You don't want to be checking going, is this wet? Is it not? You want to know that it's a wet nappy. And when it comes to poos, day 1, you get the nice one black poo. It's delightful to clean up. On day 2 to 3, that changes a little bit and it goes to a more greeny colour and slightly looser. And you want to get about 1 to 2 poos on that day. And then on day 4 or 5, when your milk actually comes in, you want it to turn into a yellow colour, sort of a mustardy yellow, really loose colour. And you want at least 2 of those per day, around the size of a £2 coin. And you want them to be pooing daily for the first 6 weeks, usually at least twice a day, but once a day is fine. Most babies will tend to poo a lot more. They tend to do it sort of after every feed at that point in time. That's also absolutely fine. That's perfect. But if they are not pooing every day and they go 24, 48 hours or so without a poo, do speak to a healthcare professional about that, or get a supporter to check your latch. It could be absolutely nothing. So it might be absolutely nothing at all. But it's good to get that checked just in case there might be something else going on there. And another way to obviously see how much they're getting is watching baby, taking photos, and as weeks go by, you will actually physically see them putting on that weight. If you put those photos side by side, you'll see their cheeks puffing out, you'll see their arms chunking up a little bit. You will actually see that weight coming on. So that's a good way to know how much they're putting on. And the next question going on is, how often should I feed my baby? So this is a case of the minimum is around 8 to 12 times in 24 hours. That's sort of every 3 to 4 hours, looking at it like that. However, as we know, babies don't feed on a schedule. They will be wanting to feed at any cues. Excuse me. Sorry about that. They will need feeding a lot often. Any feeding cues they show, just offer the breast. It's never a bad thing to offer a feed. If you're unsure what they want, offer the breast. If you're unsure why they're sort of fussing, offer them a feed, because it's not a bad thing to offer. 9 times out of 10, it's usually the right thing to do to offer the breast. But other sort of 1 out of 10, it might just be something else. But if you're unsure, feed away. Nothing bad's going to happen if you feed and you're unsure. How will I know when to feed my baby? So this is what we're talking about, the early feeding cues. You don't want to wait until they're crying, because that's a late cue. You want to look out for those early signs, so them turning their heads, fingers to their mouth, and they might open their mouth a little bit. Sorry again. But those early feeding cues are the ones to look out for, instead of waiting until they're distressed. Because if they're upset and they're crying, then you're going to need to calm them down first before they feed, because they're not going to want to go onto the breast when they're feeling distressed. So it just takes a little bit longer to get them settled and feeding. Okay, next one is, do I need anything special to breastfeed? I would say it's a very confusing thing out there on the market, things that you need to breastfeed. And personally, the only things I would suggest that you need are to have breast pads that go inside your bra to sort of soak up all of that leakage that you might get, which is quite common, especially in those early weeks. And the last thing you want is your t-shirt being soaked up with milk, because it does happen out of the blue nowhere. Usually when you're out and about, not when you're in the house, so that everyone can see. So breast pads, I think, will be really helpful, and nursing bras, so that you can really easily get your breast out and you can get it out so that the baby knows where to go. Because sometimes wearing normal bras, you can hoik them up, but then you're blocking some of those ducts that need to come out, and it's not in the right place. So nursing bras can be really useful for an easy access as well. There are a few things on the market that say you do need them. I personally don't recommend them. They're things such as nipple shields, nipple cream, dummies, pumps, feeding pillows. The nipple cream is not really necessary, because if you're in pain, then you need to get that latch checked out. Cream isn't going to solve the pain. If you're cracked and bleeding or something, that cream is going to help, because it will help with the healing process. But if you're in pain, don't just use that cream as a case of that'll solve it. Get someone else to check your latch, get some support, get some help. Shields are kind of a last resort when it comes to a baby struggling to latch on. It tends to be a lot of a go-to way. If they don't latch on, pop some shields on, but they can sometimes be a bit more of an issue than they're worth, and then it can be the case of taking them away, which can make some mums really struggle with that as well. So nipple shields tend to be a kind of last resort. Sometimes it's something that if a baby is tongue-tied, they might be suggested for a baby that's tongue-tied, and it's a little bit of a wait until they can get that tongue-tie sipped. Moving on to a dummy, we don't tend to recommend dummies for breastfed babies at least until 6 weeks, so that they can have that time to establish feeding, and so that any feeding cues they're showing, any suckling should be done on the breast, so that they can get your supply up to a good level. After 6 weeks, they can be introduced to one, but it's just a good idea to keep an eye on that weight gain, see if anything fluctuates at all, and if they are sort of starting to drop down those centiles a little bit, it would be a good idea to consider removing it. But at least for those first 6 weeks, it's a good idea to steer clear of dummies. A pump is a very personal thing. You may want to be someone that from 6 weeks, you will want to be pumping and someone else bottle feeding or you bottle feeding. You might be someone that doesn't want to bother with a pump at all. That is totally down to personal preference. I don't think it's something that you need if you're wanting to breastfeed. It's not something that you must buy. It's just something if you want to, that's something that you might consider getting. And the same with the feeding pillow. It can cause issues with positioning and attachment, which can cause stuff like mastitis, blocked ducts, because the pillow is getting in the way of being able to get that milk flowing through those ducts. So they can sometimes cause more problems. But pads and bras, good thing to get. But it can just be personal preference down to each individual mum as to what they decide to get for breastfeeding. But it doesn't mean everything that's out there for breastfeeding you must get. It's not all necessary to be able to succeed with breastfeeding. So when will my milk come in? As mentioned earlier, it's usually around day 4, but it can be between 2 to 5 days. So it could come in on day 2, could come in a little bit later. You don't need to supplement with formula. Before that, you will get colostrum, which is really, really thick milk. It's really concentrated on antibodies. Baby doesn't need much of it because they have a stomach so tiny it's around the size of a marble. So colostrum is plenty. They literally just need droplets throughout. And then when your milk comes in, you tend to get quite engorged. So it's at that point, that's when baby tends to cluster feed, because that can really help to relieve that engorgement at that point in time. Will I sleep less? Scientifically, no, because you as a breastfeeding mum will get more sleep by 7 minutes per night from studies, and that's due to the hormone that's released when you're breastfeeding. That's oxytocin that's released, and that actually makes you sleepy. So as you're feeding, you start to feel a little bit sleepy. So when you put baby down, you're already very tired. Whereas obviously if you were having to get up, make a bottle, you're probably going to be very wide awake by the time they're finished feeding. It might take you a little bit longer to get back to sleep. So it really aids you getting back to sleep. They may wake a little bit more frequently, but that hormone really will help you get back to sleep. So technically and scientifically, you will actually get more sleep if you're breastfeeding. Will breastfeeding make my boobs sag? No, is the quick answer. Getting older, pregnancy, lots of other variables go into sagging breasts, and it's not breastfeeding. So no worries in that at all. I know it's a very common myth that goes around that breastfeeding makes them sag. It's so many things that go into the fact that they might sag over time, but it's not breastfeeding. Is there anything I should eat to make me produce more? And again, this is a very common myth that you need to eat well, you need to eat certain things to up your milk supply. And the short answer is there is nothing that you eat or drink that will increase your milk supply or that will improve the quality of your milk either. Some things like oats, water, lactation cookies, and fenugreek can be put on the market to say that these will increase your supply, but there's no evidence for it. A lot of the time it tends to be almost like a placebo effect, because you eat them thinking that they will make you produce more, so you relax and your body will end up producing more because you're relaxed, and other things might go into it. But there is no evidence around that what you eat will make you produce more, and the quality of your milk will always be the same. You could have a diet of McDonald's and chips and takeaways all day, every day, and you will still produce the same milk that's perfect for your baby. It may not be great on your health, but it will still give the baby the right amount of milk and the right quality of milk as well. So enjoy eating whatever you want to eat. And if you have any troubles with your supply and you do believe you have low supply, get in contact with someone, reach out for support and get that help you need, instead of jumping out to get some food that may or may not work. And then if it doesn't help, you might be feeling a little bit disheartened that it's not worked and you're wondering what to do then. Sorry, I seem to have a bit of a tickle at the moment. Can I drink alcohol? You can. Very, very tiny amounts go into breast milk. It's so minute. I think it's definitely less than 1%, but it's a teeny tiny amount. So it will not affect your baby. We tend to say if you're safe to hold and look after your baby, you're safe to feed your baby. The recommendations for a breastfeeding mum to drink alcohol are actually the same as a woman's units to drink alcohol. So the NHS will not be suggesting you to drink more than that, because it's not great on our bodies, it's not healthy. But you do not need to pump and dump, and you're absolutely fine to feel safe to hold your baby and care for them. You're absolutely fine to feed them. However, we do say, as we said earlier, no bed sharing if you have drunk alcohol. Although if you've sort of drunk a glass of wine at lunch at 1 o'clock, you're going to be okay at 10 o'clock to bed share, because it will have been out of your system by then. If you're having a glass of wine at 9 and you're going to bed share at 10, it wouldn't really be considered safe at that point. So it's thinking about things in that way as well, that you can drink alcohol, which is fantastic to know, definitely, as a mum. Some medication, just quickly at the end, some medication they do state on the back or in the leaflet, do not take while breastfeeding. This is because there's no evidence of it, because we can't physically test on breastfeeding mums and babies because it's unethical. There's a great website called the Breastfeeding Network that if you're on medication that you've been told you can't breastfeed on, go onto that site, contact the lady that runs it. She's a pharmacist. She's just she received an MBE from the Queen at the moment, so she's very well known for what she does, and she will tell you if it has any known side effects and whether it is possibly safe for you to take while breastfeeding. And the last quick one is, should I take formula with me into the hospital or have it in at the house? And I would suggest, if you want to breastfeed, the best thing to do is for you to not have any formula, not have anything that you need to bottle feed. Because if you have a night or a day where you are really struggling and you're tired, and it's just all getting on top of you, and you do have emotional days because your hormones are going absolutely crazy after you've given birth. You're more likely to stop prematurely if you have all that in the house. I would suggest, if you do want to have those things ready, give them to someone else that you can pick them up at some point if you need them. Get someone else, you can buy everything in. If you have parents that live close by, just ask them if they can just keep them in storage for a little bit as a just in case, if you really do want to have them there just in case. In hospital, the midwives will really help you to breastfeed. And if it comes to a point where nothing's working, baby's not getting any milk, baby needs milk, you can't express anything, they will give you formula as a last resort and as an emergency. So don't worry about that. They will actually help you out during that. So I'm going to sort of finish this on 3 phrases that I love that's relating to breastfeeding. One is, if in doubt, whip them out. Always tends to be the best solution to any problem I've ever had with parenting. I'm not quite sure how I go through parenting without my boobs, to be honest. It's kind of my go-to. Never give up on a bad day. And that doesn't mean don't ever give up. You must never give up breastfeeding. It just means if you've had a really rubbish day or night and you're feeling really emotional and you're just like, right, I want to give up. I'm stopping now. Give yourself that time to get your head clear. Find sort of a point where you can sort through your head and give it sort of 24 hours. The next day when you're feeling a little bit better, do I want to give up or do I not? Do I want to carry on? What do I want to do? And if you still want to give up, obviously peer supporters will help you to do that safely as well. But it just means getting that head clear, give yourself that time to make a decision. And the last one is that breasts are rivers and not lakes. They will never, ever run out of milk. You will always have at least, I think it's 26% of your breast milk still in your breast. It will never be empty. It's always flowing. It can't ever be fully emptied. So that's sort of it from my end. The last thing I'll mention is, if you're struggling, if you don't know what to do, if you've got an issue at all, feel free to contact me. You can I'm on the group, so you can tag me in anything. You can message me. I'm happy to do video consultations at all. Reach out to someone. You're not alone in all this. Although it might feel it during this time, you're not alone. You've got lots of people to help and support you.
Thank you. Yeah. That was brilliant. There is a few questions. You've covered a lot of them, but let me just find one that you've not. Emma's asked, I'd really like to know if it's possible to express exclusively for daytime feeds and just breastfeed at night.
It's possible. Does it mention how old baby is at that point?
4 weeks old now.
Okay, so at that point, it's kind of on that edge where breastfeeding tends to be established and your supply is established as well. So you can start to express and bottle feed if you wish. The guidance is to make sure that you're expressing for a missed feed so that your supply doesn't drop. But that would kind of be the case each time you're expressing, you're giving it for the next feed. So that would be suggested. So as long as you're sort of continuing that level of expressing, your supply won't drop. It's absolutely possible to express during the day and to just breastfeed at night. I'm a bit too lazy to consider that. That's why I personally wouldn't want to, but it's completely, again, it's down to your decision as a mum. If you would like to do that and you feel that would suit you and your family better, that's absolutely fine. And at this point in time, it would be totally okay and shouldn't affect breastfeeding. Just make sure if you're bottle feeding to look up pace feeding so that you can get that in, so that you're not allowing baby to be overfed and it doesn't give them bottle preference. But it's absolutely okay to do at that point.
Brilliant, thank you. There's another one around pumping. Lauren, my milk is taking a while to come through. Baby is 8 days old now and is finding it hard to latch. I pump to keep stimulation going, but still only get a maximum of 15 ml in total from both breasts. He drinks about 60-70 ml formula every 3 hours or less, so I know I'm not producing enough. Does this mean that I never will? Do I have to keep pumping around the clock to keep the milk coming in?
So pumping it's no indication of supply. It can be a real struggle for some women to pump that milk out because it just doesn't work the same as a baby getting that milk out of you. So it could be that the fact that she doesn't respond very well to a pump. it could be that another pump would be best. Normally, double pumps that are electric can be the best ones to get that milk flowing. If she's having struggle with latching, it could be just down to a bit of positioning. Sometimes if they're in slightly off position, they're not wanting to latch on. It could also be, obviously I'm not able to diagnose, but it could be like a tongue tie that can stop babies from being able to latch on very well. And depending if baby has had bottles from the start, it could also be a bottle preference on that as well. So it may take a little bit of work to get that latching going. But I'm more than happy, if you want to message me, whoever that was, I'm more than happy to help out if you need to have some support with latching or some proper one-on-one, because I feel like this is something that might take a bit longer than just a quick question and answer. It might take a little bit more going for that. So I'm more than happy to help out. If you want to drop me a message later on this afternoon, we can get chatting and sort that out for you. But sometimes some women just don't respond to a pump very well, and that's quite common.
Yeah, I mean, I know you don't necessarily recommend pumps, but the same thing happened to me. I just couldn't pump much at all.
Yeah.
I'd be trying for ages. The thing that worked well for me, the suction pumps that you don't have to actually physically pump, or they're not electric, it's all natural. I got
your let down.
Yeah, and I got so much from doing nothing basically. So I would personally recommend that. I know you might not.
Oh, definitely.
But, I'll pop a link in for those that are interested in that. I'll give you a bit more information on that.
They're fantastic. I've heard a lot of good things about them. I didn't tend to use them for myself because I didn't really express that much. If I expressed, I used to actually hand express rather than pump. I found it more effective. I learned how to get that hand expression going. But I've heard a lot of good things, people saying that they couldn't pump a drop with an electric or a manual, and then they used what we call packer or a nature bond, and they just let it come on while the baby was feeding, and they got like 4 ounces in the space of 10 minutes, and they couldn't even pump a drop before. So they're really, really useful actually.
That's it. I tried manual and electric, and in the end it was nature bond I ended up buying another one because it was brilliant, and you just pop it on your boob when you're feeding from the other, and you don't do any work, and it's like it's milk that you would have otherwise just dripped out onto your breast. It
would have just fallen into the breast pad. It's kind of like wasted milk. And when it comes to breastfeeding, the phrase "don't cry over spilt milk" definitely does not apply when you're breastfeeding or pumping. It is heartbreaking if you lose breast milk.
I remember knocking it over once, and I honestly cried. I was like, that took me ages to do. Joe didn't see my frustration, but I was so angry.
It is literally heartbreaking if you drop some breast milk. It is not what you want.
I'll pop the link in for those interested in that. Marie said, how soon can you feed your baby after birth? Do you need to wait a little while?
They can feed literally instantly. Like I said, you can have some skin to skin and baby might latch on instantly. But it also comes to the fact that sometimes babies won't want to latch on for a little while. My daughter didn't actually feed until around 7 hours after she was born, and I was panicking completely. But they said that the placenta actually gives them a lot of goodness before they come out. So sometimes they may not actually need that feed straight away, but you can absolutely feed straight away after birth. Obviously, again, some medical issues may come into play in that. Sometimes baby may need to be taken away. I'm not sure whether around a C-section, if they're able to feed straight away. I know you can definitely have skin to skin straight away. So I think you can breastfeed instantly after a C-section. But if both you and baby are healthy, then there's absolutely nothing stopping you from just allowing yourself some skin to skin and letting baby latch on straight after birth.
Brilliant, thank you. Danielle's asked, I've never breastfed but want to with my third child due in December. Does the size of your nipple matter, as my nipples are really big with this growing baby?
No, not at all. In fact, big nipples tend to be very common with breastfeeding. That's why this boob that I have tends to be my go-to with showing things, because a big nipple, they tends to come quite far back into their mouth. The nipple doesn't come into their mouth, it goes right back into their throat. So nipple size doesn't really come into it. They may struggle to sort of latch on if they're really, really tiny. So it may just take a little bit of practice, but that's normal with any baby. It just takes a little bit of practice to get that latch right at the start.
And nobody's asked this, but on the other end of the scale, if you've got a small or inverted nipple, would people have complications there?
No, some can with very, very inverted nipples, but usually once the baby actually sucks, they'll have such a powerful suck that it will pull that nipple out. It's quite rare that it just won't come out at all. But normally, if they're inverted, once the baby sucks, it'll just pull straight out. Sometimes some women like to sort of pump a little bit or use a suction to sort of pull it out before baby latches on, because obviously with latching them, we kind of want the nipple out so that baby can get nose to nipple, they can feel it, know where to go. So some women like to sort of pull it out a little bit, but it absolutely won't affect actual breastfeeding, and if they can, they will still be able to breastfeed.
Brilliant, thank you. Lydia's asked, my baby stopped latching at day 4, so I'm having to express and bottle feed. Do you think I could get her back on the breast now she's 15 days old?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. It's just all about going back to basics, going back to that chins close, head free, inline, nose to nipple, skin to skin. Again, that really, really helps aiding that. But just going back to those basics, letting baby just cuddle with you. Sometimes they can develop a little bit of a bottle preference. So it may be that they don't get that milk out fast enough. So if they get frustrated trying to latch on, what you might want to do is sort of hand express or express a little bit until you can feel that letdown coming. It tends to feel a bit like a tingly sensation in your breast, and you'll feel when that's about to come. Get baby ready, latch them on, and that's when sort of they won't tend to get as frustrated because that milk will be coming out nice and fast like it does in a bottle. So it's just about sort of trying to balance that out, pace feeding with the bottle as well, making sure that you're pace feeding to sort of try and stop that bottle preference coming as well. But it's absolutely possible to get back onto the breast at 15 days old. It's still very, very tiny, so plenty of time for them to sort of relearn how to get it on. But getting back to basics and skin to skin is the good way to go about it.
Thank you. This is the last question, so if anybody else has got any more, just write it down now because there's a bit of a delay on the questions. Charlotte's asked, might sound silly, but do you still have to burp your baby if you're breastfeeding?
Right, there is absolutely no silly questions when it comes to breastfeeding, nothing at all. If you think it's silly, it's not, because it clearly means something. You need to ask it. So no silly questions at all. Always ask away if you're thinking it. It does depend, again, on babies. I would suggest trying to burp them, but sometimes they don't burp, sometimes they do. They tend to not burp as much if their positioning and attachment is good. If it's slightly off, then they can get a bit of air in, so they may need to be burped a little bit more. If, in theory, if they are well positioned and attached onto the breast, they shouldn't really be getting any air in unless they're really, really fussing on the breast, which might mean they get that air in at the start. But I would always suggest trying to burp your baby if they're breastfed. If they don't, then don't stress out about it, basically.
Yeah, no more questions have come in. Just checking on my phone because my phone's a lot quicker than it is on the computer. Yeah, no more. I'm really sorry if you sent a question, but I've not got it through. Still pop it in the comments, and be, like you say, you're happy to answer them in a written comment if needs be. And if you're watching this when we're not live later, still write your question and Bea will be more than happy. She's in the group. So like she said, tag her, message her, she'll happily help you. But yeah, that was really great, very informative. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me on here today. It's been lovely.
And thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye.